Hello there. Today I'd like to read Baron Hontan's chapter on Indigenous languages, included as part of his book, New Voyages to North America, after which I'll give some commentary. Let us begin. A short dictionary of the most universal language of the savages. I could easily have sent you a complete dictionary of all the savage words without excepting one, and of several curious phrases. But I considered 'twould be of no use to you, it being sufficient to see the common words that are every moment in their mouths. This is enough for any man that designs for Canada, for if he does but learn in his passage those that I have set down, he will be able to converse with the savages after frequenting their company 2 or 3 months. There are but 2 mother tongues in the whole extent of Canada, which I confine within the limits of the Mississippi. But beyond that river there's an infinity of other languages that few Europeans could yet learn, by reason of the little correspondence they have had with the savages of those parts. The 2 mother tongues I speak of are the Huron and the Algonquin. The first is understood by the Iroquois, for the difference betwixt the Huron and the Iroquois language is not greater than between the Norman and the French. And some savages on the confines of New York speak a language that is very near the same. The Andastogerons, the Toronto Geronons, the Iroronons, and several other savage nations who the Iroquois have totally destroyed spoke likewise the same tongue, and understood one another perfectly well. The second, namely the Algonquin, is as much esteemed among the savages as the Greek and Latin is in Europe, though 'twould seem that the Algonquins, to whom it owes its original, disgrace it by the thinness of the nation, for their whole number does not exceed 200. You must know that all the languages of Canada, excepting the Huron and those which retain to it, come as near to the Algonquin as the Italian to the Spanish, and 'tis for that reason that all the warriors and ancient counsellors of so many different nations affect to speak it with all manner of nicety. 'Tis so necessary to travellers in that country that in speaking it one is certain of making himself to be understood by all sorts of savages in whatsoever place he comes to, whether in Acadia or Hudson's Bay or upon the lakes or even among the Iroquois, among whom a great many have learned it for reasons of state, notwithstanding that it differs from their language more widely than night from day. The Algonquin language has neither tone nor accent nor superfluous dead letters, so that 'tis as easy to pronounce it as to write it. 'Tis not copious, no more than the other languages of America, for the people of that continent are strangers to arts and sciences. They are unacquainted with the laws of ceremony and compliment, and an infinity of words that the Europeans use to embellish their discourse. Their speech is only adapted to the niceties and conveniences of life, and there is not one useless or superfluous word in the whole language. Farther, this tongue makes no use of either F or V consonant. To the end of the dictionary, I have added the 4 tenses of the indicative of the verb I love. The indicative is formed from the infinitive, by adding the personal note, ni, which signifies me or I. Thus, sagia signifies to love, and ni sagia, I love. The same is the case with all the other verbs. 'Tis an easy matter to conjugate the verbs of this language after one has learned the present tense of the indicative mood. To the imperfect tense they add ban, as sakaban, I loved. To the perfect tense they add gi after the personal mark, as ni gi sagia, I have loved. And to the future ga, in like matter, as ni gasagia, or nin gasagia, I shall love. All the other tenses of the verb are formed from the present of the indicative. For example, nin gasagiaban, I would love. Nin gisagiaban, I should have loved. In a word, when the present of the indicative and the additional particles for the other tenses are once known, the whole language may be learned in a very little time. As for the imperative, 'tis formed by prefixing a to the infinitive, as asagia, love thou, and the plural, let us love, is formed by subjoining da to the infinitive, as sagyata, let us love. Malcolm jumping back in here. I'm going to skip past his dictionary of the Algonquin language because I'm willing to bet neither of us speak it, so we wouldn't really get anything out of it. Returning to the text at hand. You must take care to pronounce fully all of the letters of the words, and to rest upon the a's that come at the end. The pronunciation is very easy, because this language has no guttural or palate letters, such as the Spanish blank consonant, with their g and h, as well as the English th, which puts a foreigner's tongue upon the rack. I can't pass by one curious remark touching the language of the Hurons and the Iroquois, namely, that it does not use the labial letters, viz. B, F, M, P. And yet the Huron's language appears to be very pretty, and sounds admirably well, notwithstanding that the Hurons never shut their lips when they speak. Commonly, the Iroquois make use of it in their harangues and councils when they enter upon a negotiation with the French or English, but in their domestic interviews they speak their mother tongue. None of the savages of Canada care to speak French, unless they are persuaded that the force of their words will be perfectly understood. They must be very well satisfied upon that head before they venture to expose themselves in speaking their mind in French, abating for some cases of necessity where they are in the company of the coureurs de bois that do not understand their language. To return to the Huron language, we must consider that since neither the Hurons nor the Iroquois use the labial letters, 'tis impossible for either of them to learn French well. I've spent 4 days in trying to make the Hurons pronounce the labial letters, but I could not accomplish it. Nay, I am of the opinion that in 10 years' time they would not learn to pronounce these words bon, fi, monsieur, Pontchartrain. No idea how to pronounce that, sorry francophones. For instead of bon, they say on, instead of fi, ri, instead of monsieur, confure, and in the room of Pontchartrain, Conchartrain. I have here added some words of the Huron language that your curiosity may be satisfied with a view of the difference between that and the Algonquin. The Hurons speak with a great deal of gravity, and almost all their words have aspirations, the H being pronounced as strong as possible. I do not know that the letter F is used in any of the savage languages. 'Tis true, the Essanapes and the Gnactares have it, but they are seated upon the long river beyond the Mississippi, and consequently outside the limits of Canada. This concludes our reading. I want to go back and talk about a couple of things that are interesting. The opening words of this are an outrageous boast. I could easily have sent you a complete dictionary of all the savage words without accepting one. I doubt he could do that in French. So right away my sort of suspicions are raised. This guy's got a bit of an ego, or he's trying to sell himself. On the second page, there's 2 things I want to note here. First, he lists 3 nations as being destroyed by the Iroquois, the Andastogerons, the Toronto Geronons, the Erie-Ronons, and several others. The Andastogerons are the people we'd call the Susquehannock. The Erie-Ronons are the people we'd call the Erie. Who are the Toronto Geronons? Obviously it sounds like Toronto, so we naturally make the assumption, okay, this must have something to do with modern-day Toronto, people who inhabited that kind of region. This isn't necessarily the case. People could have just used the same sort of word for 2 locations. This word is probably Wendat, but it's similar enough to the Mohawk that I can break it down. So it's got the T at the beginning, which is a cislocative, indicates that the action is coming towards the speaker, like bring. It can also mean like a place, like here. Then there's an it pronoun, then rund, which is like a log, then o, which is something being submerged, and then gay, which I think is just a filler, then rono, which is like a people or a culture, and then an s, which I think is just a French mutilation. So people of the place where logs have been put in the water. Modern-day Toronto gets its name from a similar Mohawk word, Karundo, which I've been told comes from Toronto's origin as like a logging town. Who does this name refer to, though? That's the interesting thing to me. Could this be another name for the neutrals, maybe? They're the other group that's famously destroyed by the Iroquois. Probably not. I found a high-res scan of Hontan's map on Wikimedia Commons. So if we zoom into the area just north of what I would call Lake Simcoe, we see the Toronto Geronons. We also see the Baie de Toronto up north of it. So who the heck are these people supposed to be? It's the wrong sort of area to be neutrals, but I also don't think they're Hurons or Piton, because over here on the left he's got Hurons and Piton written down. He doesn't use the same word to refer to them. Who the heck are the Toronto Geronons? Also, why the heck are they on his map if he's already listing them as being destroyed? This guy doesn't make any sense. Whatever, I've spent too much time on this, nobody cares besides me. Let's get back on with actually talking about interesting things. So he talks about the Algonquin language being as esteemed among the savages as Greek and Latin are in Europe. He talks about Algonquin language being sort of like a lingua franca. This is an interesting thing to note, but I think he's got the implied direction of causality reversed. He thinks people use this language as a lingua franca because it's so esteemed as being the parent language of all of these other languages. Really, people are just using it because the French understand it. Because the Algonquins were one of the first people to establish strong ties with the French. The French learned Algonquin more readily than the other languages. And so Indigenous people, knowing that the French speak Algonquin, send whatever of their people might happen to speak Algonquin to talk to the French. Soon, because we're all using Algonquin to talk to the French, Algonquin becomes a very convenient lingua franca. I don't speak Ojibwe, you don't speak Mohawk, but we both speak Algonquin because we both interact with the French, even though we've never interacted with an Algonquin person. It's a trend that European writers sort of fall into, is that they see something that European contact is altered, and they assume that it's always been the natural state of things. On this page, he says something similar to what the Jesuits said. "'Tis not copious, no more than the other languages of America, for the people of that continent are strangers to arts and sciences, they are unaccustomed with the laws of ceremony and compliment, and an infinity of words that the Europeans use to embellish their discourse. Their speech is adapted only to the necessities and conveniences of life, and there is not one useless or superfluous word in the whole language." I've got two thoughts here. One is that, similar to the Jesuits I've talked about previously, this guy's grossly overstating his ability with the language and assumes that because he doesn't know this word, therefore it doesn't exist. Lafitau's refutation of this idea stands. I don't need to repeat it. But there's another idea I've had, and this is entirely speculation. I don't have anything to back it up, and I'm not particularly attached to it. But what if the Algonquin language at this point had been so thoroughly bastardized that what Hontan's saying is true? If what Hontan's saying is true about there only being about 200 Algonquins left, and about everybody else using the Algonquin language as a lingua franca, it's quite possible that there could be more non-Algonquin Algonquin speakers than Algonquin speakers. That it could have evolved into like a pidgin language which only deals with the necessities of life, only deals with trade because that's the only circumstance in which it's ever used. I don't know if I believe that idea, but I find it interesting regardless. On this page he's talking about conjugating verbs, and I find this very interesting because although Algonquin is completely different from Mohawk, there's a sort of similar thing going on where he's changing out parts in a sort of algorithmic fashion. He's again bragging a little bit, saying the language isn't too difficult if you understand how this stuff works. On this page he's talking about Indigenous people learning to speak French, and this is very interesting to me because I'm only sort of familiar with it the other way around. So the first part is that the native people, they don't really want to speak French unless they're confident in their ability with French beforehand. I don't want to sound stupid, I don't want to sound like a kid, and I don't want to say something I don't intend to say. These are all very human responses that sort of shine through Hontan's writing. Generally speaking, for someone to be comfortable speaking a language, they have to know that language to a fairly high degree. I'm not a comfortable Mohawk speaker, and I've been studying it very intensely for 2 years. The other interesting thing he talks about here is how, because the Huron language doesn't have any labial consonants, it's impossible for the Huron to learn French well, in his opinion. If somebody's never produced a labial consonant intentionally, how do you instruct someone on producing a B versus a P? How do you instruct someone on producing an M versus a V, or whatever the heck? An interesting example of this difficulty can be seen in certain loanwords. In Mohawk, the word for domestic cat is de goos. It's a loanword from the Dutch, das poes, but because Mohawk people couldn't pronounce P during the 1600s, they just substituted in a KG instead. Das goos. Then it gets worn down over the long centuries into de goos. Some more fun examples are European language given names. You know how the history books always sort of anglicize these foreign names, so Miguel becomes Michael and Piotr becomes Peter, and so on? Well, here, Peter de Guider. We can't pronounce the P, what's the closest thing we got? Then there's also the notion of things sounding different to different people. Maybe if you've never heard a P before, it sounds kind of like a G. I don't know. Returning to the topic of difficulty pronouncing these foreign sounds, I remember back when I was a kid and there were still a lot of first language Mohawk speakers on Six Nations. You could obviously tell who were the first language Mohawk speakers because they'd speak English with a much thicker accent, but you could also tell who had learned English as a child versus as a teenager or an adult. People who learned English a little bit later, and I don't even mean much later, I mean like 7 or 8 rather than 5 or 6, they couldn't pronounce THs properly even into their adulthood. It wouldn't be that thing over there, it would be that thing over there. or tat-ting over ter. People pronouncing the T and the H sound rather than a TH sound. So the final thing I want to talk about is his Huron dictionary. Previously I read Lafitau, and he criticized the Hontan, basically saying, your Huron dictionary is so bad that there's no way that you had these conversations with Gondialank. I wish that I spoke Huron so that I could go through and check this guy's work. As it is speaking Mohawk, I can see if he got something right if the Mohawk and the Huron words are more or less the same, but I can't criticize most of it because is it that he got it wrong, or is it that the words are different between the two languages? There's only one thing I can find here to criticize. For fire, he's written Gista, which is star in Mohawk, not fire. So maybe he was pointing at a fire and said, oh, what's that? And the person he was talking to thought he was talking about a spark that jumped off at the same time. I don't know. The real sort of condemning thing that makes me agree with Lafitau a little bit is just the brevity of his work on the Huron language. This one page is the full extent of his Huron dictionary, whereas his Algonquin dictionary was like 5 or 6 pages or so. He also went into a decent bit of detail about how the Algonquin language structurally works. He doesn't give any of that for the Huron language. So I sort of agree with Lafitau, I think. I think Hontan probably didn't speak the Huron language well enough to have the conversations he was talking about in Huron. I do think he probably spoke the Algonquin language. He goes into enough technical detail about it that I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he probably spoke it, though probably not as well as he brags about. That's all. I hope you found this interesting. See you later.